Greetings, welcome back to CS133 Practical Programming with Python. This is week 3, we're on lessons functions. So this is a fairly big topic, so we're pretty much done with all the quote-unquote simple stuff, variables, inputs, logic, also known as conditionals. You can see we spent a long time on that, the while loops, for loops, and then list. So the major variable types we've gone over. A lot of the things you do to make the code work. But now we're going over a piece that's really important for one. Reusable code is probably one of the #1 pieces you're used for, but also allowing something to only execute when something happens. Not going to see that too much necessarily for a while. So most of it's just reusable code. So I don't need to write 100 lines, and then if I want to use that code again, write 100 lines, and then if I need to use the code, write 100 lines. I can write the 100 lines, put it in a function, and then call that function over and over and over again. So this reusable code thing is probably going to be one of the big things we're going to talk about. But if you get to stuff that lists the button presses, like JavaScript, or you're building apps, then what allows you to store that code and only be used when you actually need to use the code. So very, very, very useful from that standpoint as well. But mostly what we're going to do in this case is use it so you don't have to type the code over and over again every single time that you need to use it. And honestly, sometimes it's used to kind of organize your code as well. So our goal is to understand how to create and run the functions, right? So the syntax to create it, and then what you actually need to run it. For success criteria, you'll demonstrate creating a function, sending a parameter to it, and returning a value. And what I mean by that is you don't actually need to do all of that, right? So you can create a function that all it does is execute code. You can send information to it, or you can have it return information to you. So this little example I have here is like the syntax. You can just write the function, but right here you can send information to it. And then it works just like a variable. So if I send parameters, whatever I send, it's going to print. And then you can return information. You can return any type of information you want. I could do a list. I could do true, false in this example. And again, sometimes it's nice for functions to figure out, hey, is this possible? Is this number greater than? Is this number in a list? And then it just returns true or false for it. So we'll go over the basic syntax and how to actually run the function first, and then we'll just talk about the different pieces and how they work and how to use them. So our first thing is just creating it. So the key word here, just like if or for or while, right? You're creating a statement, is def. I think it stands for define, but don't quote me on that, right? Def. Then the name of it, so just like a variable, whatever you're doing, you give it a name. It needs to follow all those standards. And then parentheses. And then our standard colon. And then you indent. And then whatever it does in here, it executes the code. So just for example, just to show you how this works, it's just going to print me. So every single time this is called, it's going to print me. So I wrote a little loop to loop it 3 times, so it prints me 3 times. Now, one other thing to look about, and again, not necessarily a great example of this, because literally this is the same line of code. But if this did have multiple lines of code, right? Every single time I do this, it prints it 3 times. So instead of doing this 9 times, I can just do this 3 times. Again, not a great example of using it, but this is how it works, right? Print me does this every single time I call this. So let me just do this one at a time. So comment those out, print me, run it. It does 3 times. Remove one of those, run it, and now it does 3 times, another 3 times, 6 times, and finally 9 times. So this is an example of, technically, right, I would have had 9 lines of code, and if I get rid of this white space in here, it's 7 lines of code. Mentioned already, not a great example, but it shows kind of how it works, right? You type in def, whatever the name is, something, this prints me, like literally print me, it literally prints me, parentheses, which will become useful in a little bit when we go to parameters, and then colon, and then everything indented, and then you stop indenting when you're done with it. Now, in Python, you do need to make these first, right? So so this should be pointed out, put this first and run it, it's going to break. It's not defined. It's kind of like a variable. You're defining a variable type thing. You need to put it outside. So put all your definitions at the top, or at least above the line of code that runs it. So let's go into parameters next. We're going to go into parameters next. Standard, def, do math, very descriptive. It's going to do math. And then in this case, I actually have 2 parameters. And we can send more. I can X, Y, Z. We're going to send 2. And then these variables are these variables down here, right? So throughout whatever you might want to do, z equals y plus x, and then I can print z again. This x goes here, this y goes here. You can use it more than once. A equals z plus y, right? You can keep using this. And here is how it works. So when I actually call it, that's when I send the parameters. So this is 2 and this is 3, right? It's just in order, 2 and 3. So in this case, 2 and 3 is 5, z is 5, y is 3, right? Y is 3, so 8. Although actually I print 5 because I'm printing z, but I run this. Equals, sorry, plus. And that's how this works. So, but again, the beauty of this is, if I want to, I can keep going with that. I can copy this, paste it, and send different numbers. So 5, 3, 26, run it, and it'll do the calculations for this. Now, maybe this is get area, right? So we get area as an example, and then we're going to go ahead and delete all of this. Area equals x times y, right? That's how that works. Length times width. Maybe that's what we should use. Let's use L and W to represent that better. Again, you want to try to do stuff that makes the most sense. And then we'll return area. So I do need to, this is telling me I'm not naming these the same thing, so you do have to make everything the same. So get area, length and width. So 2 times 3 is 6, that's the area. 5 times 3 is 15, and then 26 times 3 is 78. So it works, right? We did a little function that anytime we need to get the area, we do this. Now, the beauty of this is we can also go ahead and get the user input, right? Enter length, width equals input, enter width, and then we can get the area again. And in this case, we put in those variables, length, width, we run it, enter length 20, enter width 10, so we should get 100, right? Oh, all right, so easy enough problems. This needs to be integer, and this needs to be integer. Run it again, still sticking that 20 and 10, 20 and 10, and there we go. 200 is the length. So you can make like a little calculator app for them, ask them. Heck, you can even get the hypotenuse, right? So enter side A, enter side B. And then, of course, now the math in here is going to be a little more complicated because you got to do the square root of a squared plus b squared, and then return the hypotenuse. But you could do stuff like that, create your own little calculator, for example. But that's parameters, right? You add the variable type thing, the parameters, this is called the parameters, and you can use them down here. These are called the arguments, right? So I'm sending 2, and I'm sending 3, and then they become parameters to be used down here. So let's jump on over to actually returning something. Now I should point out, as you can see in here, you can have neither parameters or returns, as I showed in the first one. You can have returns and parameters, or you can just have one or the other, right? You can send, like I just did, this has only parameters. I can make one that just has a parameter, but let's go ahead and look at this. My num equals 6 is true, so we are sending something to this. And what we're going to do is we're going to send a number, so x, and we're going to check to see if whatever they send is less than my num. So if we look at this 5, 5, 6, this should return true, print true, it printed true, else it prints false. So this is an example of it. We can do a lot of stuff. We can return answers as well. So we can actually make this, instead of printing area, we can return area. All right, we can return the area. I'm going to delete these all now because this kind of breaks it. But what that does is this right here becomes whatever is returned. So if I print, oops, get area, I run this, and let's just do our same thing, 20 and 10, and it prints it. So this kind of becomes, how a variable, like when I type in 10, length is 10, or well, in this case 20. So length is 20, it's 20, right? Length becomes 20, it's stored 20. So when you use a return, this becomes, so we could set something to a variable like this, and we could print the variable, or we could use inside of a string, how we want print your area is plus, and we do have to change this to a string. So again, we have a variable, is because this becomes whatever the results are of this. That's how the return works. So if we go back this one more time, we have my num equals 6 is true 5. So that return, let's change it to 7, right? So is true executes right there. We send the 7 as a parameter. 7 less than 6, that's not true, so it's going to return false. So is true is false, so doesn't print true, else print false, false. Not a great example if, of actually accomplishing anything, right? Again, not a great example of actually accomplishing anything, but it shows you how it works. And it shows you can have more than one return, however, it's going to do the first one. It's going to do the first one. So a lot of times, if you're going to do something like this, you're going to have if, and then else it does this. You can also, I see quite often, where they have all kinds of stuff that goes, and if completely all else fails, it returns false. Like it does all kinds of other pieces. Or this can return numbers. It can return anything. I can return a 1. I can return a 0. Else. Return. Now this, again, won't get to it because with if else, it's got to be true or false, so it won't get there. But you can see how you have a lot of returns. It's only going to do the first one. Whatever the first one it comes to, doesn't matter. I mean, I can put return 10 here and delete this, and it's going to do the very first return. So with that, that's the basics of functions. So I'll go over it one more time, kind of review this, because this is a big concept. Our next thing is already the practice. Remember, the syntax, I'll use this as our nice little thing. The syntax to it is def, whatever you're calling the function, parentheses. If you have a parameter, you'll put it in there. And again, this part is a variable, so whatever you want to have as a variable, length, width, make it distinct so you know what it is. and then you got your colon, and you indent everything that's inside of it. You can use the parameters simply by calling them like they're variables. And if you need to return, you can return anything you want. A list, Boolean, as I did in my examples, numbers, strings. You can return whatever you want for this. And then when you need to call it, you name of the function, parentheses, and it executes right there. Again, remember, right? This is a stored residual value. It's stored code. It just sits there until you actually call it. And then when you call it, that's when you send whatever it is. And it can be a variable. You can send the user input. That's how functions work. So we'll get to the practice next, and we'll see you for that.